Barge Solutions, Jonathan Childs, Hod Masai, and Matthew Johnson. These guys do all of the sewer rehab for us. City's contracted with these two firms, and these are the firms that are providing our sewer program assistance, both master planning and sewer rehabilitation. And then, of course, TDEC, George Garden is here. Appreciate George coming in. George, Chief Engineer, TDEC, representing the regulatory side of things. They watch over everything we do, so. Real quick, the work session agenda. I think everybody has seen an agenda, but just quickly overview. And then is talk about sewer system overview, real quickly, big picture stuff, and then we'll walk through the details of everything I talked about in the overview. Master plan presentation by Hazen Sawyer. I'm sorry, Hazy guy. Name change that keeps throwing me. Sewer rehabilitation by the barge engineers. And then we'll get into overflows, and then TDEC, big picture statewide kind of stuff, regulatory stuff.
Hey, Chris,
And then,
what bullet point there are you gonna address solutions?
That's the master plan.
The master plan and sewer rehabilitation both.
Okay, very good, thank you.
Yeah, we'll get into a lot of that detail in these presentations. And then, of course, like Kirk said, open it up for questions. So we'll get into sewer system overview quickly. We are a collection-only system, and I'll try to define everything that I can. I know there's a lot of acronyms we're gonna throw around. I'll try to address those as much as I can early on. Some people have had some questions about some of those things. In our business, in our industry, we throw them out, we throw them around, we're so used to it, we sometimes forget that most people don't understand a lot of the acronyms and the verbiage. But we are a collection-only system. What that means is we do not have a sewer plant. We did have a sewer plant many years ago, back in the 80s. It was located at Deerwood Park. That was the site of the Brentwood Sewer Plant for years. It was abandoned in the 80s as part of an EPA order. Nationally, EPA sort of mandated that satellite cities and bigger metropolitan areas were to abandon their sewer plants and try to centralize sewer treatment. And so a lot of cities around Metro Nashville did just that, had to abandon their plants and connect to Metro and sign contracts for transportation and treatment agreements. The city has about 293 miles of sewer pipe, ranges from 1.25-inch low pressure force mains, which are, all of those smaller low pressure lines are associated with our grinder systems. I know you've all heard about our grinder systems in town. We've got about 3,000 customers on grinders. And just real quick, those grinders, for just informational purposes, those homes on grinders, that wastewater comes out of your house, goes into a pump that's sitting outside your house, and then that pump pumps it out to the street, down the street, connects to a gravity system. A lot of those were put in during the original or newer, or the older homes in Brentwood, Meadow Lakes, and different, Brenthaven particularly, some of the original homes in the Brentwood area that were all on septic systems, and that was a way to, when those septic systems in those neighborhoods started failing, to inexpensively or as economically as possible, get them off those septic systems and get them on public sewer. Obviously for the health hazards associated with that. Sure.
You mentioned the number of grinders that are, I guess, non-business grinders?
Yeah.
What was that number again?
There's roughly, there's 3,200, something like that,
Yeah.
grinder pumps.
There's a little over 3,000.
Yeah, it's over 3,000. And so what the city does with those is we offer homeowners own those lines, own the infrastructure, the pumps, et cetera, out to the street, just like a water system. Homeowner owns everything out to the street. And the city and city staff, and our guys, we offer a contract maintenance service. And so anything that fails on your, if you have a grinder, we will come to your house and repair it for a very minimal charge. It's a trip charge. And so that's how that works. And then of course the system goes up to 30-inch gravity sewer, which is our biggest line in town. 12 pumping stations, over 5,500 manholes. And then we have 2 significant or large sewer basins. So a map of the system. This is the overview of the map of the system. So our large sewer basins, we have the Little Harpeth River Basin, which is pretty much the focus of, up to this point, of everything we do in terms of rehabilitation, overflows, et cetera. And so you have the Little Harpeth River Basin, it extends all the way out here behind CPA School, where we have the Metro Brentwood pumping station. And it encompasses about 70% of the overall sewer system in the city. Then you have this, a smaller Owl Creek sewer basin there. Takes up about 30%, is about 30% of the system. The Little Harpeth River Basin, I will mention, obviously very large. It goes all the way from CPA, all the way out here to Ingleham, Glen Abbey, some of those neighborhoods out in there, Morgan Farms, part of Morgan Farms. So when you run your dishwasher, run your shower out in Ingleham, that water travels all the way across the city. It ends up way out here behind CPA School, and then everything from there is pumped north into downtown Nashville. Or Nashville treats it, et cetera. Owl Creek, the opposite, is the basin over here. Everything travels eastward, connects to Metro right there. It's really right at Concord and Sunset Road, right in there, where we connect to Metro Nashville. And then everything from there east, east of there, where you see the blue line in the Metro Nashville sewer basin right there. Everything out there is Metro Nashville sewer customers. So the city stops in the sewer district. And then, of course, you have the UGBs, which are included in the sewer system. They're outside the city. Kirk may want to talk about that, or, but they are in our overall master plan in terms of accounting for if they ever were sued. So sewer system history, leading up 80s, 90s, into the early 2000s, the city started seeing overflows, and let me define that real quick. Overflows are when pipe capacity is exceeded and that wastewater or sewer comes out of the system. That's what we call an overflow. And you get in different definitions of releases, surcharges, et cetera, but just for this purpose, that's an overflow. In 2006, and going forward, TDEC issued Brentwood and Metro Nashville an agreed order, which required Brentwood, and I should say in Nashville, to develop a corrective action plan. We're going to call it a CAP. That's the acronym we're going to use frequently going forward. The reason Metro is included in that order is Metro has connectivity with Brentwood all the way up and down Old Hickory Boulevard, all the way in this area right through here. So all these Metro Nashville sewer customers north of Old Hickory Boulevard, down through that corridor, there's piping infrastructure that comes southward into Brentwood, and then we transport their sewer to our station and then pump it back to them. So there's that interconnectivity. So when TDEC issued the order, obviously the order addressed was targeting or aimed at reducing overflows down there at the Brentwood pump station in that general area. Obviously, with all the sewer flow coming in from Nashville in that area and the connectivity, they had to be a party to the order to help us solve the problem. So the purpose of the CAP, Corrective Action Plan, was to provide a strategic plan to reduce overflows at the Brentwood station like I just talked about. So what is the CAP? What it required us to do? Us and Metro had to go out and find an engineering firm, independent firm, have them, hire them, bring them in, and they had to develop a strategy, corrective action plan strategy, to evaluate sewer flows, evaluate system capacity, both in us and Metro on those corridors, the impact of rainwater ion infiltration and inflow. That's another acronym, I&I. We're going to talk a lot about I&I. Infiltration and inflow. Infiltration and inflow is rainwater, groundwater, surface water that gets into the sewer system, into the piping, etc. And you'll see a great video of that for sure. So that was the CAP strategy. So CDM developed that plan, took about a year and a half or so to evaluate flows, do a lot of flow monitoring, developed that strategy to reduce overflows down in that lower corridor. So the final recommendations that came out of that was the multi-year $30 million plan we talked about, that targets rehabilitation of those sewer basins, identified particularly as having really high contributions of rainwater or I&I. In other words, we gotta fix the pipes and the manholes and the service lines, we gotta fix the infrastructure, to get the rainwater out of the system. And then at the tail end of the rehab and fixing those what happens is, and the reason we go through this process, you go, I'm sorry. You go through and you rehab and you fix all your leaky pipes and your infrastructure, you're gonna reach a point of diminishing returns. As you start fixing all that stuff, you're gonna throw money at it, and you're gonna reach a point, as your I&I continues to be removed, you're gonna reach a point of diminishing returns, where if you keep throwing money at it, you're not gonna get any benefit out of it. So at that point, when you still have those rain peaks, then you go build storage. And storage is what takes off those peaks and reduces the overflows. I think I can.
Quick,
I'm
now,
sorry.
for those that might not be familiar with the overflows, what happened with the overflow sewage for, kind of the layperson that maybe?
Spills out of the manholes, ends up in different places, obviously ends up out and around the manholes. It can end up in the rivers and streams, and those are the big controversial issues that all of Middle Tennessee is talking about right now. So,
Thank you.
Are we gonna get a copy of this hard copy?
We can, we'll post it on the
we'll post it
website.
online, everything. So when I talk about storage, again, EQ storage, may ask for Mike to help me out a little bit on this, but in trying to explain what storage does, I think it's a lot like detention, right, Mike? I would say, I think most of the planning commission and board members are very familiar with detention that gets built on properties.
For stormwater.
Stormwater detention. Same principle in theory. When you get the heavy rainwater, it starts to infiltrate, on the property, you send it to detention, you hold it until everything starts to subside, and then you release that detention and that water under a controlled release to help lessen the impact. Same thing here, when the rainwater inundates the sewer system, the piping infrastructure starts to fill up, it goes to surcharge and then goes to overflow. Pumps kick in, and you get that water out of the system and send it to storage, detention in other words, and you hold it. Sits there until everything starts to subside, and then you start to do a controlled release of that rainwater and that sewage in those storage facilities. Same general principle. This is a video pre-CAP, basically when we started out doing rehab. This is just a pipe video. This is what we do is we run cameras down in the pipes, and we video what's going on, we document it, and then we fix it. This is a video of I&I entering the system. This is during a rain event, water running, stormwater, and sewage running through the pipes. This is I&I, rainwater, getting into the system right here. This is what we see throughout the system.
304.6 feet, 12 o'clock, heavy severity.
So, CAP progress today. As part of the CAP, they identified that we were required to line so many feet of pipe, basically just repair pipe. Lining is one way we do it. We lined 31 miles of pipe, 166,000 feet, roughly, over 1,700 manholes. That equates to about 15% of the sewer basin. System overflows reduced, documented over 700 million gallons of annual I&I removed from the system. CAP program objectives met today. So what's next? What do we do next? We're at the tail end of the CAP. Again, we're going to go into a lot of detail about this with the various firms and
Were you able to run the cameras through all of the Little Harpeth River Basin pipes, or did you have to pick certain ones?
the
Or
majority of them, yeah.
Not the inch and a quarter or low pressure.
Can't do it to low pressure, I'm sorry, no, that's real small stuff. With 8 inches typically, it's about as small as go. We got smaller cameras that go up some of the 6 inch stuff, but what we do is, and how we attack that, is we put out flow monitors or meters throughout the city, in the pipes, and we move them around. And so we move them into the neighborhoods, and we've got maybe, let's say, Brenthaven, where all that sewage comes out. Brenthaven is probably a terrible example because they're on grinders, but stick meters in the ground and you measure what flow's coming out of that neighborhood, or that general area. We talked about the two large sewer basins. There's some 35 to 40 sub-basins. So we'll move them into those sub-basins and we'll stick a meter in the ground, and then when we get a big rain event, we'll watch what happens on that meter. The worst criminals, if you will, the worst cases, we'll go in and start moving rehab in there, start moving cameras in and find out what's going on, and then prioritize projects on how to make those repairs. So back to what's next? You gotta complete the CAP, projects identified in the CAP. Still doing a little bit of work in the field, but the biggest project obviously is construction of storage at the station. That's the big one out there that's gotta get completed. 2014 and 16, the board approved agreement. In 14, they approved the agreement with Hazen Engineers to develop a citywide computer model. I only throw it in there because the computer model is an incredibly enhanced tool, advanced tool that staff and these guys used for master planning and system optimization. 2016, we commissioned sewer system master plan. We commissioned, or it was completed in 16. And it's purposed for comprehensive long-range planning, meet future capacity needs of the city to build that. Takes a look at what's gonna happen in the city out through different planning horizons, 2020, 2040, full build out somewhere way out there in the future. Makes predictions. It's not any different than a park master plan, a thoroughfare master plan, traffic plan, et cetera. What roads need to get widened, et cetera. This is the same principle. So master plan tells us what pipes, if any, need to be bigger to handle everything out through build out of the entire city through the service areas. And so initiate master plan projects, and then development of a post-cap rehabilitation plan, which is what we've been talking about in the CIP the last couple of years. The post-cap rehabilitation. We're about to wind down the cap once we build a big storage facility down at the station, satisfy all the requirements of the TDEC order. We'll move into a post-cap rehabilitation. We're always gonna have to do rehabilitation somewhere. We'll move into right now, Barge is working on that post-cap plan. You'll hear more about it in the CIP process as they start to develop that plan and tell us what's gotta get done moving forward. And that's the portion of the sewer overflow. At this point,
Overview.
I'm sorry, what did I say?
Top of mind for sure.
So that's kind of big picture things. We're gonna go into details of all those things I talked about. At this part, at this time, master plan, the Hazen Sawyer guys are here. Ryan's gonna get up and talk about development of the plan, talk a little bit about the model and how it was developed. And with that said, Ryan?
Good morning, everyone. So my name is Ryan Dean, and I work with Hazen Sawyer Engineering in Nashville.
Ryan, can you speak up a little bit? That mic is not actually for the room, it's for
Sure.
the TV. So.
Good morning, my name is Ryan, and I work with Hazen Sawyer Engineering in Nashville. And I work with our conveyance crew. And a lot of the work I do is with hydraulic modeling of water and wastewater systems. Specifically, I was the primary modeler for the Brentwood sewer model, as Chris mentioned, and the master planning efforts that we did for Brentwood. And the model was wrapped up for the development of it in 2015, and our master planning was wrapped up in 2016. So the purpose of master plan, why do we have models and master plans? Well, they accomplish several things that are important for utility to plan for the future. So if we were to break down the most important aspects of a master plan, they would be as follows. So first one, to identify hydraulic deficiencies in the sewer collection system. So, in our presentations today, we focused on capacity. Understanding capacity is a key factor in the master planning process. So just in general, capacity is defined as the maximum amount that something can contain. For sewer systems, capacity can be viewed as the maximum amount of sewage that can be contained within the sewer system. So capacity can be looked at in sort of two different ways. It can be looked at in full pipe capacity, and the other would be capacity under a surcharge condition. So every pipe segment in the sewer system has a full pipe capacity, and that's a physical property of the pipe segment that describes the amount of flow any given pipe can pass at a certain slope and a certain diameter. Just a physical property, and that is purely by gravity forces alone. Once that full pipe capacity has been reached and more flow keeps coming, that flow level starts to rise above the pipe, and we transition from full pipe capacity into surcharge capacity, or pressurized flow, if you will. And as we will see, capacity is evaluated with both of these things in mind, depending on whether we're talking about dry weather flow, which is periods without rainfall, or whether we're talking about periods of rainfall, wet weather conditions. And then the next thing, to identify and evaluate improvements to address deficiencies. So a hydraulic model can be used to look at the capacity of pipes under both dry and wet flow conditions. Dry weather flow represents the sanitary flow from sewer customers with some degree of infiltration, which Chris has already touched on and will be touched on further in our presentation. But the dry weather capacity of the system is viewed in terms of how much of the pipe is full during gravity flow. Remember I said there's full pipe capacity and there's surcharge or pressurized conditions. So dry weather flow is more in tune with the full pipe capacity. They kind of go together. And for new sewers, for example, new guidelines from TDEC indicate that when you're sizing gravity sewer, they should be sized such that they can convey peak dry weather flows and without exceeding approximately one half of a full pipe flow. So if that kind of sets the stage for what we're going to be getting into. Wet weather flows are different. They produce higher, they are higher flow rates, and they are due to rainfall dependent inflow and infiltration, which again we will touch on in greater detail. But in simple terms, the sewer system is not watertight, as we saw in the video. Water makes its way into the sewer system. This is not unique to Brentwood. This happens everywhere. It's just how things happen. Roots intrude into pipes. Joints are not seated properly. Cracks can occur from compressive loads on top of the ground. Various things. So the amount of water that makes its way into the pipe during rainfall events can be seen with flow meter data. We can actually measure that pretty accurately. And that's one of the reasons that a model is able to predict surcharge levels in the future with relative accuracy. During development of our model, the response to the rainfall in the model is based on what the flow meters show over a period of dry weather conditions, over a period of small rainfalls, and large rainfall events. All of that is considered when we're developing the model. And once those parameters are set, or in other words, the model is calibrated, then the model can be used to simulate any rainfall event of importance or significance for the planning effort and how that affects our system capacity. So improvements in the master plan were developed to provide a level of service corresponding to something called a 2-year, 24-hour design storm. And that is equivalent to 3.15 inches of rain occurring over a 24-hour period. And this design storm is not something we just came up with. That was previously adopted for the CAP that Chris mentioned and utilized, and it is used by others in the state of Tennessee as more or less a guidepost or a level of service, if you will. How much money can you spend to keep overflows from happening at that level of rainfall? So, the next thing would be to identify capital improvements, costs, and schedule for improvements. So once we identify problems, once we have evaluated alternatives, we come up with a final set of improvements that we recommend. And that's based on cost-benefit analysis, how well that the alternatives adhere to our performance measurements that we set. And the model is run over different projected time periods with our flow projections to see when improvements will be needed, if not immediately. The net result of all of this is we develop a schedule of the improvements, and that serves as a basis for subsequent capital planning that is conducted at a later time. And the last thing I'll touch on is it provides Brentwood with a valuable tool to perform capacity assessments for new developments. So in addition to the master plan, which kind of took a macro look at the system, individual capacity requests can be looked at in more detail with the model. For example, if a developer provides a projected sewer flow rate for his or her projected development, the model can be used to evaluate the capacity in his proposed infrastructure and see its impact on the existing capacity at the point of connection, or just to verify that the proposed infrastructure he is proposing is sufficient. And in this way, it's kind of a good way to kind of check, look at it, the master plan is the macro, this is a micro. And going together, it's a good way to ensure that adequate capacity exists before development proceeds. So, a key part of the master planning process is developing flow projections for the future. Knowing what kind of flow rates to expect go hand in hand with our alternative analyses and identifying and recommending improvements. One small item pertaining to this discussion, however, is that neither Brentwood city limits nor its UGB represent the true sewer service area. As Chris showed on his map earlier, there are some areas that are served by Metro and a smaller area that's served by Franklin. The sewer service area is more defined by the topography and the elevation and the drainage basin delineations of the system. The sewer, after all, it's gravity flow. So you're wanting it to flow, so that's natural drainage basins. So with that being said, how do we do projections? Well, first we identify planning horizons or years that would serve as kind of the levels at which we would anticipate flow to change over time. For the master plan, we settled on 2020, 2030, and a non-specified year, which we call the ultimate build-out scenario. And that's pretty much every square inch of land in our sewer service area is planned for and accounted for. Planning data from the National Area Metropolitan Planning Organization, NPO, served as the basis for our projection. The NPO leads in the development of the region's long-range transportation plan, short-range transportation improvement programs, and they partner with the U.S. Department of Transportation, the Tennessee Department of Transportation, local elected leadership, planning, public works, business community. You get the idea. Although data from the NPO was used in our 2020 and 2030 projections, it was not considered suitable by itself to handle our ultimate build-out scenario, because some areas of the service area will take longer than the 2040 timeline that the NPO ends at to get fully built out. Therefore, available land and allowable zoning densities were considered for that ultimate build-out scenario. And so this table from the master plan shows where we landed after all of our projections were done. And you'll see that in the ultimate build-out scenario, we're talking about 50,000 people for our service area.
For a reference check, after our 2018 special census, so between the 2015 and the 2020 numbers, the two together were 34,356. So, at least in the short term, it seems to be trending down. Well, yeah, it's less than, and we haven't had that many homes. I guess what I'm saying is, if you look at the 2020 number, there's no reason to believe that's not a good number or even a little high, based on our 2018 census and what growth we've had since then.
So that's like about 8,000 people then that don't get served by those two areas? Because aren't we at about 42,000 or 43,000?
40, almost, well, 43, 889, 44,000.
Okay, so there's that many that go to the two smaller ones that are included in this?
Yeah, I'm not sure those numbers correlate exactly that way, but just based upon the raw numbers, yeah.
That's why I brought that up, because the special census probably may refer to a certain area that may not be.
No, that numbers I quoted is we took the special census data for each household and overlaid our sewer service
Ah,
areas.
okay.
Both basins came up with that.
So the system hydraulic performance evaluation, getting back to our methodology for evaluating the system capacity, dry weather and wet weather, we look at differently. Dry weather flows again, we look at it in terms of the full pipe capacity, ideally should be less than 50% of the full pipe. Although it's expected that wet weather flows will produce surcharge, capacity of sewer pipes and the sewer system in general should be such that no overflows occur on a regular basis due to capacity limitations. So this statement comes with an understanding that if it rains enough anywhere, you're going to have overflow. So that brings us back to the importance of establishing a goalpost or a goal of level of service. And so for us, it's that 2-year, 24-hour design storm. And that is statistically derived. And, you know, you want to set it such that you're not spending everything, all the money you have to fix problems, but you're wanting to spend enough to get the maximum benefit. It's a cost-benefit break. And so the 2-year, 24-hour design storm is chosen. And to put that in perspective, the statistical odds of such an event occurring in any particular year is 50%. Or another way to look at it is once every 2 years, you might see a rainfall of that magnitude in the ocean. So that's kind of that goes into the overarching planning process. So the system evaluation results, what did we find when we look at the system? Well, the flow meters that are in place measure with great accuracy flow and level and velocity. And what we see, the trunk sewer does experience surcharge conditions during wet weather events, and it does overflow during heavier rainfall events. However, I should point out, no dry weather overflows occur due to capacity limitation. Overflows and wet weather go together. I think that's a good point that we should all be aware of. So the figure below kind of represents on dry weather flow down at the lower end of the trunk, at the receiving end where the Brinkler pump station is. Your existing peak daily flow depth is roughly equivalent to 40% of your pipe flowing. And at their ultimate conditions, with all of the growth we project, it would move up to 50%. So that's another thing to just, I think it helps to visually see that the dry weather flow is not really causing the overflows. It's just an incremental bump in what the full pipe capacity is seeing.
So the wet weather events, we should be overflowing when we're above the design storm of 3.15 in the 2-year scenario.
Yeah.
So if we're overflowing below the 3.15 in wet weather events, that's why we've got to have the rehab in the tank.
That is why we do master planning, and that's why we have a plan to address that very problem. So,
I mean, to summarize that the other way, today, we're not meeting that 2-year storm standard. So the rehab and the tank is designed to let us meet that. I think that's.
so the alternatives identification and evaluation. So we've identified problems in the system. So how do we identify improvements? Needed improvements were based solely on wet weather overflow occurrence. Now, I've talked about dry weather capacity, I've talked about wet weather capacity. Before our master plan, we identified projects for improvement due solely to wet weather overflow occurrence. And so alternatives to address this existing problem were identified and evaluated such that they could handle that 2 to 24 hour storm and not overflow. That's the whole point of our master plan.
So, Ronnie, are you saying we should only have overflows if we have a design storm?
We would have overflows in excess of a storm exceeding that magnitude and duration.
Right, so 3.15 inches of rain over a 24-hour period, that's when we should expect an overflow.
That is correct.
With the
Below-
master plan.
Wait, hang on just a minute. But below that level, we should not expect overflows?
That is correct. With our recommended improvements.
The plan that we've been working.
With the master plan fully implemented.
After implementation of our plan.
Thank
The
you.
whole reason we
dry
trying to show
weather.
with
In dry
the
weather.
dry weather, which even dry weather goes hard storms.
That is correct.
And your other was that 50% of the time, there's 50% chance of having a wet weather above the 3.15, 24 hours every year. But you could also
Every other
have 4 in a 2-year period and not have any for the next 2 years.
Yeah,
Or
I
whatever.
mean,
It's an averaged out thing.
It's statistically dry.
Correct.
But we should have no pipes that during dry weather conditions are flowing above 50%.
Even in total build out, according to that diagram.
Is that correct?
So the 50% is definitely the guidance for construction of new sewer. For existing sewer, if you're surcharging slightly above 50%, I don't know that that's a critical problem that requires an immediate remedy. I think there's a certain area of gray there in engineering judgment, and it needs to be discussed. But certainly overflow would be a larger problem than a full pipe capacity of, say, 55%.
Are our rehabbed pipes keeping us at 50% or below
Looked like it was 40%.
in the rehab area, not overall?
Just to kind of clarify, that was kind of a snapshot of the pipe. It doesn't represent necessarily the whole system. As Ryan kind of mentioned, each pipe segment has its own properties, slope, size, and it can carry a certain amount of flow. So that was kind of just a general snapshot at a pipe located down our lower section. But, so generally speaking, though, at build out, during dry weather flow conditions, the model did not predict any overflows.
Sure.
Ron, you may be getting to this, but so far we've pretty much focused on the wet weather 3.15 in the 24-hour period. What about those weekends when you get 1.5 inches on Friday, 1.5 inches on Saturday, 1.5 inches on Sunday? And it all, over a period, it's getting to this, but how does our system, we'll get into how the system handles that. And, it's not a 2-year storm, but it's a lot of rain that comes out for a weekend. That's when we seem to have problems.
Yeah, and so that's called antecedent moisture conditions for a model. And specifically, we don't address that in our master plan. But certainly, if you have back-to-back rainfall events, that stresses the system and that uses capacity. So I guess choosing a 2-year, 24-hour design storm, you're setting an arbitrary marker. I say arbitrary, but it's based on surrounding utilities in the area. And at the end of the day, you have to set a metric to go by. So, if we wanted to add that condition, we could certainly take a look at that and see how our recommended improvements would perform with that. But we did not specifically go into that in our master plan.
It just seems like we get more of that than we do the
Mhm.
2-year storm.
And I would think it not happening over a 72-hour period, the flow of the sewer, which is constant,
Yeah.
correct?
Yeah.
It's flowing
Well, yeah.
every second,
Yeah,
24
that's-
hours a day, where the water's over a longer period. It's not being thrown like a bucket, it's being spread
Right.
out.
But the
The
ground.
sewer flow will be able to handle it better, unless at the end of that, you've got a 3.15.
Well, or the ground is so saturated it can't go anywhere.
That's what I'm saying, but the flow's gonna constantly be taken. On Friday morning when it starts raining, you get that 1.5 inch on Friday, then you get the 1.5 inch on Saturday, then you get the 1.5 inch on Sunday. Each of those 24-hour periods, that sewer's gonna be flowing out. I know what I always call surge ponds in our developments, in our office parks, that's what they're for a surge, they're for a huge inundation of water, which we've had 3 or 4 of those the last 2 years.
Yeah.
And they feel to keep that water from going in the streets or the sewers or the waterways so fast, and they slowly disperse that water over time. So to me, the time element of the 72-hour period of 1.5 inches of rainage seems like the system would be able to handle that at this time, because that rain that fell on Friday is pretty much gonna be out of the system Saturday. Okay.
A lot-
I deal with hydraulics a lot in my
So there's-
profession, and
You have
So
to-
time is always a factor too.
But it's not handling it if we're having those rain events. When you look at our overflow data and we're taking the measurements, you know, December 28th, December 29th, December 30th, and it's less than, it's an inch and a half here, an inch and a half here, we're still overflowing, so it's not handling it.
But that's what the master
That's
plan is
about the
addressing. That's what we're addressing here, what we're doing to take care of those situations. And that situation would be easier to take care of, like, Little said. But if it's over a period of time, then a flash 3-inch rainfall all at once in the.
Or even 2 inches of rain in a
Yeah.
30-minute period.
So the master plan would help this significantly, what we're talking about, correct?
Definitely.
Okay.
What we're talking about is intensity, the amount of rainfall
Exactly.
over a period of time. And so you could have 2 inches of rain over a week, and it cause no overflows. If you have
Right.
2 inches of rain over 15 minutes, everybody's gonna overflow.
Right.
In reality, because that overflows and rainfall intensity, that matters. And the design storm, the way that that's constructed, it sort of accounts for peak hourly intensity on a statistical basis. If you look at it, that rainfall is kind of in a nice bell-shaped pattern, and it's formed and derived from statistical analysis. So, you know, again, that was the metric we used, and we can certainly look at individual scenarios with our model now that it is developed, if we want to increase our level of confidence over our variables.
Ryan, before you move on, so for a new pipe, being installed, 50% capacity, or 50% full is the top of capacity. But you said for an existing line, there's a little bit of, I'm gonna paraphrase, a little bit of buffer, but from an engineering perspective, more specifically, I think you said that an existing pipe should run no more than 55% full. Did I understand that correctly?
No, I just threw 55 out as an arbitrary.
Well, so from an engineering perspective, to help a layperson understand, what percentage can an existing pipe run before you would say that's at capacity?
I'll just speak in general terms. You can go full pipe and still your gravity, that pipe has full pipe gravity capacity. So it can handle it without surcharge, right?
Right, but so
That's
are you
50%.
praying for no rain?
But that's a different metric.
But you have to account for groundwater, right? You have to account for rain because we know it exists. So you have to take some anticipated amount of rain and factor that in to the percentage full to understand capacity. Am I missing that?
That is baked in actually to the dry weather 50% rule. You have two kinds of infiltration. One is groundwater from underneath, and one is rain-dependent infiltration, which increases the groundwater table, but it also comes from the top through percolation.
Right.
So that 50% guideline, and I think if I remember correctly, the word approximately is used with that. And for new sewers, you want the dry weather capacity to be approximately 0.5% full, or 1/2 full, in other words, at the peak daily dry weather flow.
To be able to handle INI, any kind of,
Sure. So for dry weather flow, you will have something called groundwater infiltration. That's your existing groundwater table and how that percolates into the pipe. And just as a rule of thumb, that's generally something like 80% of minimum sanitary flow throughout the day. You just kind of bump that in. Our guys at Barge will do a better job of explaining this than I am.
right, you had mentioned it, though, and I just want to make sure I understand. So if we start to approach 55% full in a pipe during dry weather conditions, we should believe that to be at capacity?
I wouldn't say it that way.
No?
No.
Right.
I would throw out 55% to be, to kind of give an example of the amount. I think it comes into a case-by-case engineering judgment basis. And if you go over 55 and go to 60, if you go to 70, that pipe has full pipe capacity for that flow that's coming to it. That 50% is meant, I think, just as a general guideline when you're designing and planning for the future. Does that help?
Not really, but
Um,
maybe more.
So the 50% is for regular sewage, regular stuff, and groundwater seeping in.
Yes.
The remaining 50%, you need to save the room for the high rainfall events.
Yeah, I think that's accurate.
And did you say we were running at 40% as of 2020,
Well, I think
2015?
in 2015, which is what our model was in existing conditions of the master plan, yeah, it was.
We were running at 40%, and we, so we,
Right.
and we think with the ultimate build out for the city of Brentwood, the most we'll get to is 50% capacity in the system.
That is correct.
Okay.
Again, let's keep in mind, as Drew pointed out, that was a segment of the system. Each sub-basin has its own dynamics, own slope issues, so you have to analyze each of them differently.
That's also a good point. Every pipe segment has its own unique full pipe capacity, depending on slope and various other factors. Oh, yeah. So, just kind of going back to alternatives, with overflows, that was our trigger for identifying improvements. Once we identified what needed to be fixed, we looked at different ways to add capacity to address it. And so that figure kind of shows three different approaches that are typically used to add capacity. You can add conveyance, which means you're upsizing pipes, you're increasing the full pipe capacity. You're upsizing infrastructure just in general to allow more flow to come through before it gets to that surcharge condition. Another way is I&I reduction. And that is through our rehabilitation program. That's where you're trying to reduce as much as possible that I&I is making into the system that's robbing you of your regular capacity that could be used for your sanitary flows. And then storage, which the way that works, it gives you storage for when it rains and you have a highly intense rainfall that pushes a plug of flow down that system. That storage can capture that peak flow and store it temporarily while the system calms down, the rainfall passes, and then capacity opens back up, and then you slowly release it back in the system, avoiding an overflow. So those are the three things that we looked at. And where we landed was storage along with the continued rehabilitation program were recommended as the best solution for Brentwood based on cost and effectiveness. Storage improvements were sized to keep the sewer level surcharge in the trunk at appropriate levels during our 2-year storm. And if we have localized areas outside the trunk that had predicted overflows, such as lift stations or something like that, we identified it, and those are on the target list for continued evaluation. And those kinds of situations can be addressed with an upsize of something, whether it's an upsize pump, upsize of a force main, something of that nature. So those localized areas, those are kind of more straightforward to address, but for the rest of it, it's storage tank. And so the summary that we have for our master plan I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry, just a quick question on the previous slide. Back to the question you asked earlier. Choosing the 2-year, 24-hour design storm, is that a standard or an industry best practice, or is that something that was chosen by the planning commission or by the city commission, or are there different, is there like a number of choices that could be selected, or is that just the best practice for the industry?
I wouldn't call it a standard, I would call it, it's something that's kind of, it can vary. We could have chosen a larger storm to plan our improvements by, but there's no other place in Middle Tennessee that I know of that chooses a lot less than.
What did you say? Again, repeat that. We couldn't hear, I couldn't hear.
Right, so I think there's some leeway with the 2-year, 24-hour storm, and others can speak to that probably better than I can.
Was that recommended by the city staff, or was that chosen by the commission, or is that just an industry? I was just curious where that 2-year, 24-hour design storm came from.
Well, I will say that it's the same one that Metro used. Like when Chris was mentioning the caps that were decreed in 2006 for both Metro and Brentwood, that storm was used by Metro and by Brentwood together.
2-hour, 24-hour storm is sort of a traditional threshold that's come down through EPA and is generally the standard for most enforceable orders for cities that are trying to do what you all are doing, get your system tighter, improve the integrity of it. If you can achieve that, that's considered to be a reasonable, cost-effective standard for your system.
And it's been applied in Chattanooga, Dothan, Alabama, several of those areas in EPA Region 4. That is the standard in order not to add too much burden to the utility in terms of repairs and not to be to be very under conservative, if I may, very liberal with SSOs. So that is, as you said, that's more of an accepted industry guideline for what's reasonable, for economically, for engineering-wise, system design. Sorry, somebody had.
Little thing, you had mentioned pumps to kind of help some issues at some key points.
Sure.
Since building a storage tank is a multi-year process, and we still are having these overflows, especially at key areas, key neighborhoods, Lenox Park, Meadow Lake, whatever, can we kind of Band-Aid the situation and help with the problem in the meantime by putting pumps to help get that stuff out of there at the Lenox Park overflow station, overflow area, or at Meadow Lake or something, kind of Band-Aid it until the storage tank is completed?
It's possible, we could look at those individuals.
Yeah, so I think when you mentioned pumps, I think you were maybe referencing just the fuel tank and getting that flow from there. That hadn't been determined. As far as pumping, we're limited at our Metro Brentwood station at 9.5 MGD.
How much we can get there at a time?
That's how much. So we cannot exceed that limit. So at this time, we can't increase pumps or anything to use as a temporary fix until we get the tank online.
Thank you.
Ryan, we need to kind of hurry up, we've got plenty more to do.
So the recommendations, storage we talked about, and this is the table of our summary of recommended improvements. One of the storage tanks is down at the Brentwood Pumping Station, and that was proposed as a schedule of July 2019, July 2021. Recommended projects by 2030, I&I study that Trump EQ, Franklin Road, Long Street Drive, gravity upsize, and recommended projects by ultimate build out. There's a small segment in Elm Creek that we looked at as potential gravity upsize, Chenoweth, scale school, lift station improvements. Those were not any critical at this point in time. They were kind of out in the future. So with that being said, we'll turn it back over to Drew.
Just real quick, for you, those of you that don't know, I'm Drew Murray, I'm the Assistant Director for the Water Department. I just kind of want to briefly touch on, as it relates to the master plan, and as Ryan mentioned, one of the tools that came out of the master plan was our hydraulic model. We can use that model for any new developments that are proposed, and we have in a number of cases. But kind of the process for that is basically the application for water and sewer availability is submitted to us from a developer or person for a project. It has general information, but ultimately we take the flow that's being requested for that project, and we run the model to determine, basically to verify and check that our master plan is in line. Like Ryan said, this is more of a local study on the infrastructure versus the master plan kind of bigger, larger look. Right now, we typically, for hydraulic modeling, we'll look at projects that have a 2,000 gallons per day or greater flow to our system that will add that. Or if there's some assumptions, or that this project changes some of the assumptions we made for the master plan. So maybe zoning changes or anything like that, we would utilize the model to do that. Typically for a really small project, a couple homes or something, it's considered that the master plan model that was initially done took that into account with our ultimate build-out projections. Again, when we do these model scenarios, we run them under a 2-year, 24-hour storm and full build-out. So that kind of worst case scenario. And again, based on those results, any recommendations from the engineer and the model would get passed along to the developer for improvements to the construction.
So Drew, real quick, as you evaluate new capacity, if you have overflows in an area already, and there's a proposal without a design storm, and then there's a proposal that comes forward, do you say that we have available capacity to put more, sewer in that line, in that area?
In that area, so the way our system works is we've got a lot of sub-basins, but our primarily issue is the trunk capacity. So it's the trunk that really hinders our flow and it backs up and it causes overflows during a rain event. And so a lot of times in these capacity analysis, we'll look, but we make a note that the trunk line is seeing a surcharge, but the amount of flow added is insignificant and does not cause any new overflow locations that we will already experience.
So it's okay to have more gallons overflow, but not create a new overflow location? Is that how I understand what you just said?
That is one way we're looking at it, because and that would be current conditions. And so that's why we have the master plan. The master plan has outlined projects and improvements that we're working on that will ultimately eliminate that overflow and be able to handle that additional flow because of the projections.
Current condition or future projected condition? There's a difference, right?
It'd be future projected conditions. So when we look at a development, we look at it, but we know that there's issues and overflows during a 2 to 24-hour storm. However, we also know that we have a master plan in place, projects identified, that will eliminate those overflows.
At some future date.
At some future date. Once the master plan and the improvements have all been completed.
Chris might better be able to address this. I know we've had, 4 overflows in the last 2 years. Is that correct?
No.
I think it's more than that.
8, 19, I think 9.
Before that, on the drier years, we didn't have as much, but back in 2005, 2004, 2006, when we started doing the master, or the rehabilitation, I guess we really started doing some stuff. What were we running on a wet year then?
We've actually got some data coming up.
Just because of that.
Okay.
Other questions, we'll proceed on. Okay, with that, I'll turn it over to Barge Design, who is our consultant that's been brought on board to help us with our rehabilitation program.
My name is Hatem Al-Said with Barge Design Solutions. Thank you for having me here. I'm just going to walk through what the data that we've analyzed from flow monitoring, and I'm going to identify or describe a few terms, but basically I'm going to talk about flow monitoring, I&I analysis, infiltration and inflow, water coming through groundwater and sewer joints, and water coming over the streets into manhole covers or holes through pipes. And then I'm going to hand it over to Matthew to talk about the rehabilitation and the planning after that. So I thought this would be a picture that explained from publication from Water Environment Federation. You have the inflow sources and infiltration sources. So what's in white is what you can describe as inflow sources, whether they are illicit connections, stormwater, roof leaders that are coming and connected directly into the sewer, or above ground, or if the stormwater is somehow, again, connections that shouldn't be there, also through manhole covers, perforated manhole covers that are in the path of stormwater running over the street, or when it's funded off-road. Also there is the infiltration, which can come through, cracks are not really open, it comes through fractures or holes, deteriorated manholes. So that's what's being repaired in the rehab program to stop those sources, as well as disconnection of any identified source. There is that's something actually each person here in this room, assuming everybody's a resident, can contribute to. Check your clean out cover when you go home. Make sure it's not missing, you know, or knocked over by a lawnmower or something, because that could be draining stormwater from your yard into the system and taking up capacity. So just remember, those are the I&I, infiltration and inflow. And the process, analysis process here goes from, we're looking at flow monitoring data. I'm going to talk about this a little later, but we look at dry periods like Ryan was talking about, the dry weather periods where there is no rainfall, so what's in the sewer. And then I also identify events for analysis. Those are the storm events. Those are the rainfall that compare less or more than the design event that's being looked at. Calculate the excess flow, how much storm water that out of those events that is making, what's the percentage of rainfall from any given storm that's making it into your system. And then rank those areas, different flow monitors across the city, and say, okay, where is the area that's contributing the most? Because not all areas have the same age of system or same problems, so they contribute. So we want to target the areas with the highest concentration and come down. Biggest problems first. And those what's prioritized for inspection, which is the camera that Chris showed you in the sewer, and you find those gushers into your sewer, and that's what you fix. This is a picture of the flow monitors that are in Brentwood. This is the one that's downstream of all of them, and that's the one we focused the analysis on. There are rain gauges in the system, and the earliest monitoring began in 2008, which is some of you were saying, you know, how many overflows we had then, and the work has been done over time, and we'll actually show you that there has been a reduction and improvement in the system. Before that, let me just quickly describe how flow monitoring works for those who are interested. This is a cross-section of a manhole, the street or the ground is here. Man rising, there are steps or the chimney of the manhole. And what's done in the sewer, we see that the brownish represents the flow in the sewer. And there is a ring that's inserted. And at the bottom of that ring, at 6 o'clock, if you will, there is a probably this size that has a Doppler sensor that detects particle in the sewage, just like Doppler for rainfall detects the particles in cloud, and measures the velocity of that flow. There is also a depth sensor that detects where the water surface is, and in case the sewer is surcharged, there is a pressure sensor, because once the pipe is full, the ultrasonic sensor no longer detects a discontinuity in the surface, it's full. So the pressure would measure the head, and you know where you're level. With level in any circular pipe, with the velocity of the flow and the level of the flow, you can tell how much flow is actually going. You calculate the flow that's going in terms of gallons per minute or million gallons per day. So that's the setup for the flow monitor, and there is a connection where you have what's called the brain or the processor that stores the data, that transmits the data. There's sometimes an antenna that sends this data, in your case, so you can load it on a website. Now, we have the technology, we have the area that's covered, and we have, now I'm going to just move to one last definition before we go to the data analysis results. And this is what Ryan was talking about. What you have here in the brown and orange, or both are probably brown, is what you would see in the sewer, and that's what you want in your sewer. The base wastewater flow, which part of which is the groundwater, and this is what Ryan was saying, about 80% of the lowest flow at any time. This is time of the day. So from midnight to midnight the next day, 0 to 24 hours, and that's the flow. And it varies, basically increasing as people wake up and start preparing, 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, you see a peak. Everybody goes to work, starts, and then some come back, and some come back later, you know, washing dishes, showers, whatever, children. So you see another rise. But that's a typical, what we call diurnal, the daily variation of the flow. Some of it is groundwater infiltration, and the rest is what I would call funded sewage, the people who paid for the water and put it in the sewer, and that's what you want to treat. Unfortunately, no sewer system, any part of the country, is perfect and does not receive rainfall dependent infiltration and inflow. Water just comes in through the sources we talked about. And that is the volume of iron. What you see in the blue is the excess flow that we looked at in the analysis. Right? Then, so, I'm going to talk about SSOs, I'm going to talk about ionite, and I'm going to talk about the dry weather flow, how all of those went down from 2008 to 2019. The beautiful thing about this, I'm going to do it with 2 slides only, so I'm almost done. Right? So total rainfall in 2008 annual was about 46, well, not about, obviously, 6.7 inches, you know, and your average rainfall, I think, is somewhere 42, 45 inches. So you were around average, if I remember your annual rainfall. In 2019, we had 76 inches of rainfall.
How many design storms were in 2019?
I did not calculate that, sir, but that's a good point. And I'm going to show you a graph later that shows some of the storms that were used for the analysis.
That would be kind of important, though, wouldn't it?
It would, if again, you're looking at the, so that's a very good point. I'll tell you why you won't see it here. Because as we know, most of the events that are above, or the events that are above the design event, are causing overflows. If you're trying to characterize your sewer and relate rainfall, and in addition to the INI, you don't want it to be overflowing because that's volume lost. The next slide, if you would allow me to come back to this on the next slide, if the question is not answered, we can build on it. Is that okay?
Perfect.
Thank you, sir. So you had a significant increase in rainfall over the year, kept the ground wet, kept water everywhere, basically. Well, what you see is the overflow events went down from 18 events caused by rainfall. We're talking about events here are SSO, sanitary sewer overflows. They went down to 8. We had 8 events, although the rainfall was increased. And that is, as well as the calculated volume, dropped significantly. Right? Yes.
Do you have an answer, do you have an amount for, in the 18 events, how many gallons of sewer were calculated versus in the 2019, how many gallons of sewer?
We don't have that data from 2008 as far as volume going forward. So that's why at that time in 08, duration was kept, so that's why that number is there. We don't have a volume.
How far back does our volume go? That data,
It's
where-
just the last couple of years.
Do you know how many gallons we overflowed in 2019?
No. We can get that number.
It's documented, you have it, right?
I believe it to be 5.4 billion gallons.
Possible. I'd have to look at the data.
And it's very hard to calculate those volumes because remember, there is no measurement, there is no device measuring how much is coming out of the manhole. There is an estimate and regulatory agencies have provided some guidelines. So I think, duration is very telling, the number of locations is very telling. So that's the story that we saw in the data from SSOs. Now, this is what gives me satisfaction. If I've talked about this and explained it, then I walk out happy and hopefully you're happy. All right. So what this has is a, for those of you who remember the regression, you know, we put a bunch of points and see the linear behavior or make a function out of it. What we have on the horizontal axis is rainfall, inches of rainfall, and what we have here is the inflow volume calculated. Remember the blue portion of the graph I showed you earlier? That's what we have here. So what we do is we look at the flow after a rainfall event, during and after a rainfall event, and see how much flow is in the sewer before. That's our dry, that's the sewage that should be there. We subtract that from the total flow, and we're left with the storm water or extraneous flow or infiltration inflow that made it into the sewer because of that rainfall event. So against every event that we had, obviously they are not perfect. I love them to be all either half an inch or 1 or 1.5, but they are all over the place. And they won't all produce the same volume, but that's what you see. What you see in the blue here is 2008. So each rainfall, so we had maybe a 0.6 inch rainfall here that generated about 0.7 million gallons based on the calculation of flow. And so forth, and one that is very close, and the orange is the 2019 behavior. And studies, analysis, you know, look everywhere. This is a linear relationship. More rainfall, more volume of I&I in the sewer. Up to a certain point, and that's what I'm going to come back to your question, up to a certain point, it starts tapering off because there is only so much rain you can put in the sewer. It's not designed to hold all the rain, all the events that you do. Surely, you can go to a 5-year, 24-hour design event, but your sewers are becoming tunnels at this point. But that's not what you want. You want something reasonable. So at some point, it will taper off, and that's why we can't go too high or reach the design event. So if the design event is currently causing overflows, it cannot factor into that calculation. But we did, we did do one event that's closer that where overflows were not present, so we were able to factor it into the calculation. And that happened in 2019, so we know at least one event, to answer your question, that falls in that and did not, was managed. What this shows, after we've plotted those curves, what you want to see, two things when you do those. So forget about the data generated functions told us what the relationship of inflow volume to rainfall. And now let's look at the lines. What you want to see is that line moving to the right and and dropping down, because this tells you two things. You need more rainfall to cause your system to see some inflow or infiltration. So the threshold, if you will, which moved from here to here, and then you want the shallower slope, meaning at the same event, you're seeing less volume of inflow in your system. That's what you want to see. So that, again, tells the story. It tells us for just a 2-inch. I like to select, rather than go out here to the limit of the analysis, I like to select something within the range of the analysis. Some storms here, some storms there. And for a 2-inch event, you know, the work that's been done, I would like to say that it got about 1.2 million gallons of inflow, took it out of the system because of the rehab. For a year that had almost 60% more rainfall. Not only that, but we also looked at the dry weather flow. And EPA has some guidelines on what is described as excessive. And the word excessive meaning if it's at this number or less, you will pay so much more money, to simplify it, to take out any additional gallon. If it's significantly under that, there is an obvious problem. There is something that's wrong. So, and that number for dry weather is 120 gallons per capita per day, 120 gallons per person per day. If your dry weather flow is around that number, EPA guidelines say that you did what you can. The beauty is when we looked at the 2008 and the 2019, I say beauty, sorry, sewer engineers have weird things that they consider beautiful, so. But the point is, when we looked at the dry weather flow in 2008 compared to the dry weather flow in 2019, you actually had less average dry weather flow. Remember, you had a population increase. Not only that, when we divided it by the number of people, we actually saw that this number is actually slightly less than the EPA guidance. So in terms of dry weather flow, you are, as well as we saw in SSOs, we saw in the INI volume that's making it into the sewer, plus dry weather flow telling a story that this rehab work is making a difference over the years. And what kind of work has been done, I'm going to hand it over to Matthew. We'll take questions at the end, right?
Yeah.
So I'm going to come back. You'll see me again here.
My name is Matthew Johnson. I'm with Water Design as well. We've been talking about rehab all through this presentation so far. I think Chris mentioned earlier in one of his slides the number of miles that have been rehabbed over manholes, but what does that actually mean? What kind of methods of rehab has the city been implementing up to this point? So what we have here is the three main primary methods that the city has utilized up to this point. The first method that the city's been implementing, cured in place pipe. That's what you were mining earlier. That's what we're referring to. This slide or this picture right here. This is a cured in place pipe actually being installed in a mainline pipe. So essentially what we're doing here is it's essentially a liner. It's almost like a sock that's installed, put into the pipe. It's inflated, it's heated, and there's different methods of heating up the liner. That liner hardens, and essentially what you're left with is a pipe inside of a pipe. And the thought here is that once we've got that liner in, some of those cracks or holes that were in that hose pipe, that existing hose pipe, they're going to be sealed off, so that water that used to be getting into the pipe, it can no longer enter in. And then on the manholes, and this is a picture of what we're talking about here. The primary method that the city's been using is epoxy rehab. And so basically what happens here is a man goes down into a manhole, he sprays this epoxy all the way from top to bottom in the manhole, and that again seals off, doesn't allow water to enter into the manhole. The side benefit of using epoxy is also it's resistant to corrosion, so there's also a benefit to that particular method. For the service laterals, and what we're talking about here is primarily on the public side of the system. It's essentially the same thing as what we were talking about here with the main lines, except what we're doing here is we're sealing off that connection point between the service lateral and the mainline pipe, and then a portion of the service lateral again on the public side. So that's, again, those are the primary methods the city's been using up to this point, and those continue to be methods that the city uses going forward. But then, again, looking forward, and what we're talking about here is primarily the rehab that was identified in the master plan that Ethan talked about earlier that will need to be implemented to achieve those goals. So the city has addressed a lot of the low-hanging fruit up to this point. So what we've been discussing is using some other methods to identify where the leaks, where that stormwater is getting into the system. So some of the methods that we're talking about using going forward, closed circuit TV, again, that's been used, but expanding on that. Manhole inspections, that's just a group or a team going to each manhole and taking photos, assessing where the defects in those manholes might be. Dye testing, that's if there's a good reason to think through other means that maybe a storm sewer, I'll use that as an example, maybe a storm sewer is somehow got a connection to the sanitary sewer, then we might use dye tablets, throw them down in the storm sewer, pour some water in. If we have a man in the sanitary sewer looking at a manhole, and if he sees the dye come through, then we know we've got a connection somewhere that needs to be addressed. And then on the private property side, and again, smoke testing, we'll find defects both on the public and private sides. But on the private side, smoke testing is a good method. This is a photo here of smoke testing in action. Anywhere where smoke can get to, so what goes on is a man will stick essentially a big fan on top of a manhole and turn it on, throw some smoke bombs down there, and that smoke gets pushed through the storms, through the sanitary system. And anywhere where there's some leaks or maybe there's a busted cleanout cap, like we were talking about earlier, that smoke is going to come out, and then this gentleman right here, he's logging where that defect was, what type of defect it is, usually take a GPS point so we know exactly where to go back to. And so all that data is collected, and then we know where maybe some potential I&I is getting in the system. So with that, I think I will hand it off to Drew to talk about overflows.
Trying to go quickly through here. Basically, I'm just going to talk briefly about overflows and how we kind of handle them currently. Just real briefly, we talked a ton about, obviously, I&I, rainfall that have generated overflows for us. But there's also other methods that overflows can occur. Mechanical failures, pump stations, there's pumps, valves, electrical connections that can fail at any given moment, and it can cause a backup and eventually an overflow upstream of that station or at that station. Also, pipe blockages due to grease, fat oils and grease. Anything you flush down a toilet will end up in our collection system, so, rags, shirts, whatever, you name it, we've seen it. That can get in there and cause a blockage in the pipe and eventually an overflow. And then any other debris, gravel from construction activity, repairs. Yeah, we're seeing a lot of gravel in our trunk lines. And then direct damage to infrastructure, that's basically contractors doing work. They may be accidentally hit a force main, sewer will spill out right there in that location, or they could hit something, not know it, and then maybe a week later it causes a backup, and you do a camera TV and identify it and make the repairs. But those are just some basic causes for overflows. So monitoring, we've utilized meters. Autumn spoke about flow meters. That's a little different than what this is. It's the same kind of concept. And I'm going to primarily speak towards our wet weather events and our overflows, because that's typically when we have issues. And so when we're trying to monitor those overflows, and one way is obviously for the Little Harbor is the Brentwood Metro Pump Station. It's got a wet well in that, and when levels in that wet well begin to, they exceed the capacity of the station, they rise, and we have alarms set to let us know that, hey, things are rising, there's a potential for an overflow. Here, we've had that for a number of years. Here, the last 2 years, we've purchased these little depth meters, and basically they go inside a manhole, and it's kind of similar to the flow meter, but this measures basically the level of the manhole. We have these, we've placed these at our controlled overflow points, and I'll talk about that next. But basically these things, they alert us when the level in the sewer rises, and we can kind of be aware and be prepared for a potential overflow at our, again, we just have these at our overflow locations and a few other locations. And then another one is just visual, whether it's a homeowner, citizen, let us know an overflow, or our utilities that are off the valve. So as I mentioned, those monitors, we have 5 that are what I call kind of permanent, that we keep to kind of keep a pulse in the system. One is the Hillsborough Road, and then we have one at Granny White, just upstream from Granny White Road there, and we have one at Heritage Way. So basically we have one in our lower system, this is the Brentwood Pump Station, We kind of have one located in the mid trunk section, and then one in our upper reaches of our trunk. And then we have two at Chenoweth and Scales, and basically these were, have been put in, they were identified in the master plan, so we have those there to monitor those stations and begin to collect data, so that we can kind of monitor those and keep an eye so that we can address those improvements as needed for the future. This is just a quick little graph of, this is down at Hillsborough Road. So this was for a month worth of data. And basically you can see down here, this is just your typical flow in the pipe. This is inches over here, and this is time. And I've imposed this red line. This is basically the ground level for that manhole. That manhole is about 14 feet deep. And so you can see here, the blue line is our flow level. The black lines right here indicate rainfall power. And so you can see here, we had a storm, and you can see the depth comes up. And obviously when the blue line reaches that red line, we are in an overflow stage. And so we can see when it started and then when it ended. And you can see here over in the last month, from the 23rd to the 23rd of January, we experienced 3 overflows at the Hillsborough Road location. Just real quick, basically we have an overflow response plan that we have submitted, and it's part of our collection system license. It's through TDEC. It basically outlines our operating procedures for handling overflows, reporting, tracking, and doing cleanup. One of the things that's part of our collection license that TDEC requires is that when an overflow occurs, whether it reaches a stream or not, whether it's wet weather related or not, we have to notify TDEC within 24 hours. We currently do that via email. And it's basically a brief email explaining that we had an overflow at this date, time, and location. And that's it. After that, we have 5 days, what we call a 5-day overflow report, that we have to submit to TDEC within that 5-day period after that overflow occurs. And it's a much more detailed report. Here's an example over here of what it entails. But basically, it's time, date, location, the duration, estimated volume, what caused that overflow, and if there were any impacted streams that overflow reached, and then obviously what cleanup measures were taken for that overflow. On top of TDEC's requirements, we also recently have started posting our overflows on our website. And again, that's at the brentwoodtn.gov. And if you go to departments, water services, sewer system, right here, and then there's a tab, sanitary sewer overflows. You can go there. We post those on an annual basis, and as of now, we have a 2019 tally that you can put in PDF format and view the basically information we provide, date, time, location, duration.
How quickly is that posted on the city website?
Currently, we do that within that 5-day period. So by the time the report is due to the state, we'll have this up there. This is what we currently. And then last, basically cleanup. It's kind of a case-by-case situation because sometimes it may be in a yard or something. But 3 basic principles. One is removal of the debris, and that can vary. That can be a rake or a shovel, or it can be an excavator. And then after that, we apply a disinfectant. Typically, it's a lime product. And then after that, we apply a straw, basically straw bales.
What do you mean removal of debris? Define that.
Well, obviously there's debris in the sewer. A lot of times in an overflow situation, what you'll find is like a gritty material. It's a gritty material. Sometimes it's sludge, and it can just be right there. Sometimes it's just a little gray water is all it is. Again, it just depends on what type of overflow the pond is located in the system. But it can vary as far as what that debris is. But, possibly to
Any solids that came out, I guess you're defining as debris.
debris is solid, yeah, solids or water. We do have, if in situations there's pooling or ponding, or like if a contractor is digging a trench and the sewer flows into that trench. We do have methods and we have contractors on standby that we can back out that and try and collect the actual liquid if it's possible.
What's the capacity of the vacuum?
They vary. I think the typical sizes are 12 to 2,000 gallons for the big trucks. So that is all I have on that. I'll now turn it over to George Garland, who's going to continue.
Switch out slides. Switch slides.
I'm going to save the first slide that was shown that listed me as a team member of Brentwood. Normally, I have no friends in the room. The city doesn't like me, their engineers don't like me, residents don't like me, third-party organizations don't like me. In fact, that's the way I judge whether I'm doing a good job. If no one likes me, I'm probably doing my job right. Secondly, the first thing I want to say is that my job here today is not to minimize an overflow or bypass, whichever you look at it. They are serious. I have spent the last 2 years, or the 4 years I've been at TDAC, going around to every commissioner's training session I could get in front of and telling them how important water loss in a water system and I&I is in sewer systems. We are in deep kinship, no pun intended, with I&I in this state. So the takeaway point is you are not alone. There are lots of people. There is everybody that is fighting this battle. And it is not a sprint, it is a marathon. It is not finished when you've finished all the rehab you've done so far. You are evidence of that. You have done the best rehab in the state. No one removed 46 approximately % of the flow. We know what you removed because you pay for every gallon you pump to Metro. It's not like a wastewater plant where things overflow and you get there. We don't have any idea exactly what the magnitude is unless we go through a lot of additional measurement, even beyond what you do. We know exactly how many gallons you pump to Metro. So you know if you get a 2-inch storm that you're going to pay X amount more money to send it to Metro. So we know what's going on. You are at the top of our list of people who have been successful in removing volumes of I&I. Now, I'm not going to say where you started, but you have been the most successful. Have you done it as efficiently as anybody, money-wise? Probably. Believe it or not. Just think of all those utilities out there that are not nearly as well off as Brentwood and have extensive sewer systems and can't even pay their bills today, but they face the same backlog that you do with respect to sewer maintenance, or you did in 2006. So I'm not here to minimize overflows or bypasses at all. This is a graph as a result of a study that was probably done between 2012 and 2016. You're not on this graph because you have a state operating permit. You don't treat the wastewater. This is all municipal wastewater treatment plants. So we're people that have what we call an NPDES permits. That's what, in your case, Nashville has when they handle your wastewater. 2/3 of the facilities in the state, that's this bunch of guys right here, and this is just a plot of % I&I treated in a year. 2/3 of the facilities in the state of Tennessee that have a discharge permit, or 2/3 treat more than 50% annual I&I. In other words, the water that goes to their wastewater treatment plant, 50% of it is I&I for all those guys up there. As you can see, those are the ones that are getting, and some of them are treating 94% I&I. Hard to make a buck doing that. Okay, and 181 of the 242 municipal wastewater, or 82%, exceed the rated capacity of their wastewater treatment plant with a 2-year, 24-hour storm. And that over the state, that's 3.4. We live in a dry pocket here, and it's about 3.1 inches in 24 hours. Is a 2-year 24-hour storm, which is the standard. It's the same standard when your public works department designs, or a developer designs streets and curbs and storm sewers. They use that storm. So we're not, it's sort of a civil engineering agreed upon standard. I'm just going to go through this really quickly. This is how much I&I is costing us as a state. So let me tell you, I am pleased when citizens groups, city councils, public works, anybody gets on this bandwagon. It's costing us this much money to the state of Tennessee every year. I don't know how much it's costing you every year exactly, but you can find out. And what are the implications? First, it's a public health hazard. Now, this is a complicated subject because whenever you talk about public health, you've got to talk about not only what's happening, but you have to talk about the risk pathway. Now, I don't want to say that I'm not concerned if there's an overflow at the pump station in a Little Harpeth. Look at the public health. I am. But realize what kind of water's coming out of that manhole. It's usually going to happen during a cold period of time, so the microbes are not going to live very long. Secondly, nobody's in the Harpeth at that time except a crazy whitewater kayaker, excuse me. Probably no one wading it, okay? Don't want to minimize, don't take that as a minimization of a public health threat. There is raw sewage coming out in a very dilute fashion when you have it overflow. That's the number one cause we don't want sewage coming out of collection systems. Public health, that's the biggest issue. The second one is degrading of the receiving waters. Algae, harmful algae bloom, the effect on the stream, downstream. When you discharge here, it goes into the Harpeth River. And Dory's really mad. I'm really mad. The problem is, it's not necessarily the bacteria and pathogens that leave and go to the Harpeth River. It's probably not even the things that are naturally treated and oxidized and removed. And it's really nitrogen and phosphorus that you and I collect from the food we eat and put it in the river, and it ends up in the Harpeth. When it overflows, it goes directly there. Otherwise, it just goes down the Cumberland River. Not happy about that either, and neither are the people in the Gulf, but that's another topic for today. Higher sewer rates. You know what that is because you pay for every dollar. Gallon for gallon, you pay. You pay for higher maintenance costs for I&I. You're pumping more. You're building more pumps. The pumps are running more. You have higher operational costs. You have to hire all these high-paid engineers to monitor. Higher sewer rates. It also means that you have to, and this is the hidden cost, you have to update pump stations, conveyance systems earlier and more than you ought to. There is a huge cost here. And loss of system capacity. The reason TDEC, when a utility has a hard time keeping up with their responsibility to keep their wastewater in the pipe that's involved, is because that loss of capacity is really important and it's going to be exceeded if we don't do something about it. So that's why we're involved. Or we are partners with you. I think I talked about that. I apologize for my graphs, and it's one reason why I'm going to ask you not to distribute these graphs yet. Some of these I did last night, and my skills are not the match of these individuals with their PowerPoint. I look at total systems. When a number of your citizens came and talked to us, we were not exactly appalled at the overflows. I've been in this job even 4 years is enough to know that overflows are not something that are rare in the state. But I started looking at this, and my main issue today is not to tell you, pat you on the back necessarily, that you've done a really great job, but I'm doing that. But I wanted to find out if the data that they presented, because I must admit, I don't every morning wake up and ask for the sewer report from Brentwood. Don't do that. So I said, well, maybe this data is important, and we've overlooked it. So we're going to look at it. So how do I look at I&I? These guys have expressed techniques that I agree with 100% technically. I agree with everything they've done. They're doing the very best that anybody in the country is doing for you with the spectrum monitoring and metering. I look at the big picture a little bit more because they can fix every little branch of sewer in their system, and overall, they may not be making any progress if there's some other problem. So I look at the big picture. So I plot, and the flow that's going out of the Brentwood pump station, is that the, yeah, that's the blue line. Maybe it should be the brown line. Sorry, I can't think colors based on that. I haven't changed it last night. And this line is rainfall. Now, it's not just every day. It is a 12-month running average. Okay? What does that do? It's not a statistical technique disguising the truth. It's really a way to smooth out the curve so I know where things are going. All right? If you look at this, and this is one of the points I wanted to make that they didn't make, is that a 2-year, 24-hour storm is based on history. I don't know about you, but weather ain't acting like it used to. We can see that in a number of different places. This is the rainfall, the 12-month, 24-hour storm rainfall. 2014, that area, we had pretty high rains in there. Look at 2018 and 19. What's our average rainfall in Middle Tennessee? About 40, 42, 43 inches. Not anymore. It's the last 2 years it's been 53, 56. So I look at is the amount of water that the Brentwood pump station is pumping, how is it affected by this rainfall? If we're not pumping, we're pumping less than the rainfall that's added to our flow would indicate, then I think you're making progress. You're holding the line. You're not losing ground anyway. You are definitely not losing ground. Look at the rainfall went from here, when your flow was there, your flow's there now, the rainfall's up here. That's pretty good. So when somebody comes to me and says, here's this data, and they indicate reports that that Brentwood by themselves have turned in. And by the way, I applaud Brentwood for being one of the best systems in reporting on themselves. That's one of the dangers of self-reporting. Only the good guys get labeled as bad guys. We know that. That's why I use pump rates and not Drew Murhead's crew's observations. Because I've got most 95 of the systems in this state I know have overflows and with called I&I, but they never report it, so they're never in trouble. It's a fallacy in the whole principle of putting yourself on the court. Okay. So I look at the pump station down here. Now this is from January 2011 to November 2019. I didn't go all the way back to when you started your rehab stuff. And this is the maximum pump rate at the pump station, the Brentwood pump station that pumps in Metro. Now, the maximum capacity to Metro, I think, is 9.5 MGD. What's the pumps capable of? If they run 24 hours a day, balls to the wall. It's like 9.3. Looks like it's real close to about 9.3, I think. There it is, right there. Now, when you have an overflow down in the trunk line that goes down the Little Harpeth, what's going on? Well, what's going on is you can't evacuate that line fast enough. And you haven't got a permit to pump more than about this. So Metro's going to be really unhappy if you send them more water than they can handle. So I look, anytime you're pumping on an average day above 9 million gallons per day, that means there's a high likelihood, whether anybody sees it or reports it, we always have this question, if an overflow occurs in the woods and there's no one there, did it happen? So I'm looking at the data on what the pump station's running. So I'm looking at these times, these months right in here that are there, or those months, we had at least one event where that pump station was maxed out for a good portion of the day, which is a probable time when you're going to have a problem down there, right? So if and this is one of this shows my deficiencies of using Excel, I'm sorry. But if the little blue dots that are scattered all over here are the monthly total amount of rain that's for each month, and it goes from actually the same period, 2011 to 2019. And they're all over everywhere. Well, I do my little trick again. I calculate what's the total rainfall in a whole year, and that's this broader line right here. As you can see, what's happened lately, well, even depending on whether we look at a daily amount or a total amount, right in here is the highest rainfall we've ever seen. Okay? How many times did we meet the 9 million gallon point? Well, if I knew how to use Excel really well, I'd have made a column, but I don't know how to do that. These are the times that we had no time in those months that we met 9 MGD. Here's the times right here that we had one time in that month that we made it. These are the times you had 2 times a month that you made 9 million. And here is probably 3 times a month. And oops, right there, which was February 2018, which is the worst month for rainfall in sewer systems in Tennessee. You had 6. That's the worst time that I think you probably had an overflow. Now you may have had plus or minus. Sometimes you got the 9 mg and you handled everything exactly. Sometimes you didn't. Sometimes it might have come faster and the pumps didn't run max for just a short period of time, and maybe you had a momentary overflow. But this tells me the health of the system. This tells me that even though the rainfall has jumped up way up here, you've only had one place, and the general trend is not much worse, even better considering the rainfall, in my opinion. Not minimizing the impact of overflowing. Okay, so I look at Brentwood from the standpoint of a compliance order. In fact, anything that they submit to me as a result of the agreed consent or consent order, whichever you want to call it, I have to pay attention to. You all have been, in 2004, we slapped a proposed consent order on you. It took us 2 years to negotiate the deal. In 2006, 2008, the meters were out there and you started your work. So that worked out pretty well. Y'all started doing a lot of work. We're at the point now, and we'll get to where we are right now, because I think that's what a lot of the discussion in the city's been about. Where are we with respect to the consent order? Are we going to get there? Why isn't it over in 2018 when it was supposed to be? I don't know exactly all the ins and outs of the decision process. I just know what we look at from a consent standpoint and the legal standards and procedures. Well, it was issued jointly to MWS and Brentwood in 2006 after what I would consider an aggressive and successful rehab program resulted in measured reductions of rain-derived iodine in the Brentwood system. And three times we have given you relief or exemptions of a certain amount. Now, that's kind of an awkward thing to do because, as Hassan talked about, we're really measuring a reduction in the rate of inflow into your system So if I'm gonna give you so many houses, which is so many gallons per day, then I've gotta take that rate and pick a storm and say, 2-inch storm, I'm gonna give you 1.2 million gallons. Well, that is a very inexact size. I often use a 1-inch in a lot of places today to give credit. If I gave you credit at 3.4 or 3.1 inches of rain, it would be a humongous amount. So it's a judgment call. Is it a good judgment call? Well, right now, I only give 50% credit for removal for most people. You were lucky and got 100% for the last two. This was a 50% you had really documented that you had already removed. And this is an important thing for people to remember. When we give you a credit like this for additional development, what we're saying is you've already taken this amount out. Okay? That is important. It's not that we're going to guess. The reason I say that is because if you have an NPDES permit, we allow a little bit more latitude. We say, okay, if you've had 6 overflows in a certain area, then you are on a moratorium, either self-imposed or we impose it on you and justify every house that you do. And the standard there is if you've got a plan in place to remove I&I, we'll give you some credit. And it ends up being nickel and dime credit in that case. In your case, we gave you credit because of something you had actually removed. We had flow data that was consistent, that was in a 95 R-squared 0.95 accuracy from the meters. The last CAPIR that you all submitted was in 2014, and it included 4 options for additional work. 2014 anticipated that you would be finished in 2018, but it also proposed work that was not in the original order. This was additional work that you proposed to us to do in the CAPIR. The CAPIR, Corrective Action Plan / Engineering Report, becomes part of your order. We tell you to develop a plan and to execute the plan. You tell us what the plan is, we approve the plan, and then you're off to execute it, and you're under the order to do that. So it evaluated 4 options. One is the Brentwood Pump Station 3 MGD EQ basin. You recommended that. You were didn't make a complete commitment on a new Tower Park EQ basin, and I believe that's more than 3 at this point. And then the additional sewer rehab at about $1.25 million per year, and increased booster or Brentwood pump station capacity to Metro Water Systems, moving it from 9 to 12, and that was not recommended because Metro hadn't agreed to accept that much wastewater. Okay? Now, this brings up an intellectual engineering topic that goes on behind closed doors for an infinite length of time, and that is whether we should allow EQ basins or just require people to stop the leaks. Now, there are purists among our engineering community that say that an EQ basin is a Band-Aid, and a poor one at that. It costs money, it never really solves the problem, it just pushes it down the road. There's truth in that. And the other people say, and because of that, we should never build them. And then there's some people that say, I can solve all my problems if I just build big enough EQ basins. That's maybe true. And I think we as a state have a little bit of a compromise position. Fighting I&I is a little like offense and defense. You can think about it in terms of war or football games. The defense always lags the offense. And how do you find I&I? It's got to happen. So you got to detect that it's happening. You got to localize where it's happening. You got to figure out why it's happening, and you got to fix it. So you've always got a time lag. So I'm all in, yeah,
Well, just to be clear, the EQ storage basin, is that what we usually call the storage tank?
surge tank, yeah,
Surge tank,
it's, EQ stands for, sorry for the acronym jargon, stands for equalization. You're equalizing the flow by touching the surge. That's all. So I have sort of a compromised position on this, and I think most of the people in the state, we know lots of places where they've done no rehab, but just built EQ basins. Disaster. We found places that just try to do all the rehab and stop all the leaks. They're sometimes successful. But a good strategy, which is what's been proposed, is to have this stopgap method that buys you time and it allows you to fix and find and fix things before the surge basin lifespan is over. So I think this is a good technique. We're probably going to answer the letter that you sent out on December the 13th, asking for an extension to finish putting in that basin. And our question is going to be, are these other things going to be a part of the extension or not? We haven't completely come to where we are on that. That's why I say the reply is pending. I met with you guys in early December or stuff, and you got the request into us. We spent time the last couple of weeks looking at this data to make sure that you weren't losing ground. Did you do all this work to 2018? I think Constance Graham showed that you're not losing ground. You've still, if you compare what you had in 2008 to 2019, you've still made progress. Everything that I've seen, and they pay me to be a crotchety old man and a skeptic, so I'm going to try to find out that you all have screwed up. I couldn't prove it. So you haven't lost ground with respect to I&I, so I'm not upset about it. The only issue that Brentwood has with the state is, what are they going to do now, y'all going to do now between now and 2022 when you ask for the extension? I don't really think we're going to not grant the extension. What good would that do? You're going to stop, sue us? I mean, we don't want that. We don't want to be in court. So let's do something that's reasonable. I do believe that when the plans come in for that surge basin, I'm going to ask the engineers to have justified something. I want them to justify that they're going to hold the water in pipe by adding this EQ basin or surge basin. It ought to be designed to handle what you need. A little bit of projection of where you're going to be. You still got some houses that you can build in accordance with our the amount of extra level in the sewer that we give you. It's got to handle that. It's got to get any overflows in that whole basin down to the point where we can expect less than 5 overflows in a year for sure. So that's what I'm going to be expecting, the engineering report that goes with that EQ basin or surge basin to demonstrate we're building something that's big enough. Now, you need to understand one thing. You pay for every gallon that goes to Metro. The more you use that surge basin, or the more you need to use that surge basin, what's going to happen? That surge basin is going to suck water out of that sewer main. It's going to create airspace, and what's going to fill that airspace when it's raining? Don't expect your bill to Metro to go down. Okay? Nobody with surge basins ever sees their sewer bill go down. Because one of the ironies about I&I is you don't get more I&I in the pipe if it's already flowing full. If you create airspace in the pipe, you're going to move more water. Some of it you're going to store, some of it you're going to pump. That's why we're not in favor, because we're worried about the economic impact of I&I as well as environmental and public health. Not as much, but we are worried about that, and that's something to think about. The surge basin is not going to be cheaper than stopping the flow, but it may give you a chance to get that done before you eliminate overflows. That's all I have. Been glad to answer questions.
That's generally the end of the presentation. So we ran over, I realize that, but I felt like it was information that everybody was interested in, so we'll open it up to questions for any of the folks.
I have a question about the presentation you just gave. So you're saying that are all the overflows that we have, or that our system has, just a result of the end capacity? I mean, if overflows are occurring in a local area, having a tank or having more repairs further down the line, is it gonna help that? Like, do we know where are all of our overflows due to a total system capacity or in an isolated area because of a blockage or
We have to
whatever?
separate overflows that are, and this is not an official terminology, they're local problems.
Right.
There's too much grease from the Jack's Hamburger joint, or some other joint. It's probably a thing to say that any restaurants, apparently they have too much grease. But, that happens. There's collapses. There's trash that gets in there. Somebody does something. If it's a localized issue, generally speaking, we would come and it creates a short-term overflow, maybe even combined with the rain, but the rain wouldn't have caused the overflow if there hadn't been some obstruction. Then we'll usually take that 5-day report that you submitted, and by that time you've probably figured out what caused it. We'll say, well, we won't count we'll count that as an overflow, but we're not going to count it towards, hold it against you. It's going to happen.
Do we know
you
how
fix
ours
it.
split out?
And then you have, I'm sorry, one more time, just a second. The other kind is systemic.
Right.
And that has to do with general leaks all over everywhere that are accumulated when the rain comes. That is the ones that we're talking about that we removed.
Okay, so the number that we saw earlier, that we've gone down from 18 overflows a year to 6 last year, just was the systemic? It was the whole system?
Yes.
Okay.
That graph represented wet weather events, overflows associated
Okay.
due to wet weather. Is that the question?
Okay.
And they did not include, like contractor or mechanical issues or anything like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
I've got a question.
Yes.
Yeah, for George.
Jordan.
Yeah.
Looking at our system, understanding you're on a strict taskmaster. Since 2006, when basically the loss was a big issue going on, or probably 2004. So now our plan has worked and it's been what the design for us to do. Is that correct?
I think that you've done as good as anyone in the state's done. You've done it in a reasonable amount of time. It's well documented. I don't know that we can complain about anything about that regard.
And our plan forward with the EQ basin and all is a good plan environmentally and as far as the Tennessee Department of Environmental concerns.
So we approved the CAFER in 2014. We just need to make sure we understand of those 3 things that you recommended. The EQ basin here, the EQ basin at Tower Park, and the continued rehab, that's going to be adequate to get you to the point where to remove you from the moratorium and say, so you can run through the streets and go free at last. We want to make sure that the results show that you are out of control over the overflows, that we're not looking at things that are going to happen in rainstorms less than the 3.1 inches 24-hour storm. Is it an exact science? No. That's why in general, we give people a couple of mistakes before we throw moratoriums on them, because we know it's gonna happen practically. But we wanna make sure that systemically, you're gonna be out of the business of irrigating from manholes.
This is a question just in general from the planning commission side, because we have 2 different bodies here, and I think it's different. And for planning commissioners, a lot of this we're hearing is maybe the first time we've heard that. And then, but there is modeling done before something comes to the planning commission. Is there anything else that we should receive as planning commissioners with our presentations that would help us, and we need to evaluate any of this, you know, as a new development comes forward. A model has been run on that sewer.
If, again, I think Drew said if it's a significant, if it's a, you got one on Monday night, it's a 3-lot subdivision, we would not model that.
Right.
If anything of significance is modeled, yeah.
But if it's a significant one, then we really ought to include that in planning commission plan, right?
Yeah, there's a report that comes out of that capacity assessment, right?
Yeah, usually there's a little tech memo that the consulting engineer will put together and it basically outline.
I don't remember seeing that. I just think if that's what we're gonna do, let's just highlight that in the future. I think that's a good takeaway, something we can look for, and now we're a little more educated what it means too, so, thank you.
Question. For the city, I know we were talking about our contract, the bottom one was, you know, expand our capacity from 9 to 12 with Nashville, which I don't think is gonna happen. How long is our contract with Nashville?
What are we, 5 more years?
2024.
No, 4 more years now.
Okay.
But keep in mind, this is it's not like they can just say, we're not gonna do it anymore, because it all came about from that EPA order back in the 70s. So it's just,
If they couldn't lower us, and they probably wouldn't raise us.
you could ask for more, correct me if I'm wrong, we could go ask for more capacity, it's just the financial cost of it. Because what it involves is, you gotta upsize the pump station, but you also gotta upsize all the receiving lines between that pump station, I say all, some of the receiving lines between that pump station and the wastewater treatment plant. Run down Chickering Road through Belmead and then on from there. So a lot of what they talk about, it comes back to a cost benefit. And keep in mind for everybody, I think everybody knows that, the water sewer has to pay for itself. There's no, hey, we had a good year of sales tax, we can take money from the general fund and pay for this. It's all rate-based costs. So that's why even in the master plan, the issue of, they talked about cost-effective and system effectiveness play into what the final recommendations were.
Also, Kurt, something I've heard before and heard again today is Metro flows sewer to us.
Correct.
That we then pump back to them. So then cutting off the sewer pump station or something like that, right?
Yeah, we're unique in that case. They couldn't, if they wanted to just cut off the satellite cities, they really couldn't do us, because they'd have a hard problem with their own sewer.
Yeah.
One thing
North
that I
of
wanted-
Old Hickory, north of Old Hickory that come to us, that we get them back.
On that 2022 extension and the parameters George said it about our storage tanks, in order to get the 2022 extension, is that under the assumption that we will have started the storage tanks, completed the storage tanks, bought the land? What's your decision made on that? Since it's a 2-year process to do the tank.
The request assumes that by December 31st, 2022, that you're gonna have that online.
Both or one storage tank?
One. We're interested in how much, frankly, one of the main issues is, one of the recommendations in that FER, and I'm not sure it's in the master plan, which is not really, from our standpoint, a compliance and enforcement issue or standard. You had listed in there in the FER that you were considering a $1.25 million commitment every year to continue sewer rehab. We want clarification on that issue probably.
One thing I wanted to mention, first of all, thank all of you for the information you gave us today. We get it with so much other information, but to clarify it like y'all did really was, but I also think one of the things that you said, George, that was so important was where we started from. And you've watched where we started from and what progress we have made. And I appreciate your remarks about Brentwood doing what they should do to make the improvements they can under the circumstances we started with. And one of the things, Kurt wasn't even our city manager, but whenever I got on the city commission, the state was about to take over our water department because we were so in the red. And so the sewer and the water department here, it's not like we started out with this sophisticated sewer system to begin with, but I appreciate you bringing up what we've done to this point and how we're addressing this.
Yeah, it sounds like you're still kind of the Titans, who started out a little bit rough and you finished
Yeah,
out strong.
yeah.
As I understand it, TDEC has us, correct me if I'm wrong, after a certain number of overflows at a certain point, certain station that seems to be a problematic area, we have to post a sign down by that overflow point.
That's
What
part
is
of your permit,
TDEC's
yeah.
recommend, how many, 5 or something at one place?
Well, I wouldn't, if you have a chronic overflow place, you're supposed to put a sign up.
Right, what
Okay.
would TDEC's recommendation be to alerting residents? Is 5 days on our website sufficient enough, or do we need to do something more so for help? I'm getting a lot of concerns from residents that are
I know,
frustrated.
and I'm aware that you are. So, I actually think that with your model, you can do a better than 5-day projection. Now, I don't have the authority to tell you how quickly to put it out. I don't think we need to go to every cell phone of a resident in Brentwood 15 minutes after a forecasted 2-inch rain. Some do, not in the state of Tennessee, but some do. My way of thinking is when we issue a state operating permit, in your case, or an NPDS permit in a discharger's case, we're basically saying we're giving you the right to manage wastewater for your citizens. We're not going to step in until we feel that's not happening. It is a public trust in perpetuity to provide wastewater. And there are some places where it's more critical to make sure the public knows about it. Maybe the portion of the park where, that the sewer, or the HARP is going through, it's downstream of a chronic overflow, maybe that's an important spot. Like I said, I doubt many people are wading or fishing in the HARPA. And even April, when the water in that stream is 5 feet out of its banks and it's 30 times its normal flow. I doubt it. Is that exposure problem? That's really for you guys to decide. I have no jurisdiction to tell you how quick it is to alert the public. The 5-day purpose is to, primarily is for us to make sure that something hasn't been forgotten. And that if there is a systemic problem that hasn't been identified from that report, we can say, are you sure that's gonna fix that problem? That's what it's for. It's not a public, it's not really intended to be a public warning, because there are very few times you have an overflow that isn't over in a day, much less 5 days.
George, quick question. What's TDOT, so we've talked a lot, and we've got a lot of residents that are obviously concerned, right? What is TDOT's official position? TDEC, I'm sorry.
I don't know about the
Too many acronyms, and I guess not enough coffee today, but thank you for correcting me. TDEC, what is their official position on overflows?
It is a violation of your permit.
Okay. Second question, if we have one of these overflow places, and you mentioned a little bit about it, I think you used a consistent, the term consistent overflow location.
Chronic, yeah.
Chronic. What is the position of your agency, TDEC, of adding flow to the line that would impact that? What's the official TDEC position? I thought I heard you say something earlier. I just want to make sure that we're on the same page.
You are under a consent order or an agreed order. An agreed order allows you to operate when you don't meet every requirement of your permit. That's why they exist. They exist so that you don't have to tell everybody to move out of Brentwood because they don't have sewer service anymore.
Right.
That's not practical. You have delegated authority to operate your wastewater treatment system. Your whole system, basically, is under a moratorium right now, because at the very bottom of the system, you're having a chronic overflow. The purpose of getting off that moratorium is, well, the purpose of the moratorium is to get you to the point that that does not happen. But you're under a legal responsibility with a plan of action to get you to that point. And it's not that we look the other way, but you've got the latitude to continue to serve and make decisions as a city. You're not in receivership. So you can make decisions within the wastewater that we've given you. We've given you credit for 1.2 million gallons because of what you've done already. Of that 1.2 million, you guys have a responsibility to keep a checkbook that says, we've got 1.2 million, we've spent 600,000 of that credit by giving it to other people, other developers in the years that you've been under this order, and you still got another 600,000. So we would expect you to stay under that legally defined, authorized credit at this point.